Since coming into power, President Trump has imposed sweeping tariffs, including on some of America's closest allies. He cited various reasons for the new tariffs, like fentanyl trafficking, trade deficits, and other countries' tariffs imposed on U.S. exports. Joining us to discuss the merits and the risks of these tariffs are Vance Ginn, president of Ginn Economic Consulting, and former chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget during Trump's first term, as well as Peter Earle, a senior economist with the American Institute for Economic Research. Gentlemen, thank you for joining. Vance, kicking off with you, do the benefits outweigh the risks with imposing tariffs?
No, I think there's a huge cost to having tariffs. And the one thing I wanted to say early on is that trade benefits everyone. That's why we have mutually beneficial exchanges, or we wouldn't trade. And so I get I get where the Trump administration is trying to come from. It was this way during the first administration when I was there, of looking at how do we counteract some of the things that are going on in communist China and other places around the globe. But I really think it's upon America to do things that are more liberty-driven and freedom-driven, and that's by getting rid of tariffs and going down to zero as quickly as possible, and reducing the cost of doing business here at home. We still have pretty high corporate taxes. We have a lot of government spending and a lot of debt and regulations. Let's get those out of the way before we start blaming other countries in this process.
Peter, over to you. Same question.
Exact same response. I mean, freedom is what matters. We all benefit from free trade, and essentially tariffs are an invisible tax, although they're not going to be invisible for very long. The cost of tariffs are not only, higher prices on consumers who are right now still beleaguered by 3 years of above average inflation and other costs, but also, they insulate industries from competition. They foul up supply chains. So it's hard for me to see any benefit of them all, except perhaps teaching people the value of free trade. I think a lot of consumers are going to learn in the next 6 months exactly how much better it is to not have tariffs than to, put in place these protectionist policies.
Peter, staying with you, are all tariffs on imports bad in your view, even if they're reciprocal, or is it the way in which Trump negotiates that's adding fuel to the flame, such as with the stock market sell-off?
So tariffs are bad, but there's one way to make them worse, and that's all this uncertainty. To put them on, take them off, improvise, change the percentages, lob threats, all that sort of thing is increasing uncertainty. And, when Trump was elected, we saw a huge boost, a huge rise to both consumer and business confidence, and that's eroded now. It's almost completely gone. As for reciprocal tariffs, there's an argument that putting them on can induce other nations to drop their tariffs. I'm not sure that will be the case. I'd much rather take the high ground and also, express the view and act in adherence to the with the policies that make our businesses more competitive than others. But it remains to be seen what's going to happen. I don't think reciprocal tariffs are going to be universally successful in lowering other countries' tariffs for a few reasons. They're smaller, they have a lot less to gain, but I guess we're going to see.
And Vance, over to you in regards to national security. There's a thought that we need to be able to have things like key pharmaceuticals as well as steel and aluminum made in this country in the event of war. What is your view on that?
Well, I try not to, discount myself or go against anything Peter says, because he always brings up great points. And so I think when you look at national security, you look at some of these key issues or things like pharmaceuticals, steel, and aluminum, the better approach here to make sure that we have available, abundant resources for those and goods for people who want to demand them across the country is through trade. If we only look at what happens in America, we're going to limit and we're going to stifle the innovation and expansion of production across not only America, but the globe, because we have to pay higher prices for this. One thing to think about with the amount of imports that we bring in, about half of those are actually intermediate goods that go into the production of other things throughout our economy. It's not final sales of goods and services at the end of the day. And so I think this is something we really need to look at. And also consumers like to pay low prices. There's been this discussion that, American dream isn't about paying low prices. Well, it's up to who, right? It's a subjective determination about what the American dream is. And I think people do like paying lower prices and having abundant supply of the things that they want. And that's what we have through free trade. And so I hope that we go more in that direction and away from this protectionist sort of policies.
And staying with you on that, what if those products are made in countries where human rights abuses and other things may not be on an equal level playing field?
This is a key point, and I don't want human rights abuses anywhere. And I want freedom and liberty for every person, no matter where they are across the globe. That's part of my Let People Prosper sort of movement that I'm trying to work on. And in China, of course, they do have issues there with communist China. But one of the things about it is the tariffs don't influence the Chinese communist government. They're not up for re-election. They don't have a democracy like we do, a republic like we do. And so I think it's very, we got to make sure we keep that into mind, that no matter what we do to them, at the end of the day, they're not getting re-elected. But just like the first round of the Trump tariffs in 2017, 18, and 19, China didn't change their trade practices. In fact, our trade deficit kept going up. So if this was going to work then, why would it work now? And I think a big part of going in this direction of having trade with more countries is to have more free trade agreements with our allies. Why not start expanding our trade with East Asian countries and things of that nature if we are so worried about China, compared with trying to put higher taxes on Americans through tariffs?
And Peter, some of the thoughts behind tariffs is that they can be counterbalanced with reduction in taxes, which would further stimulate the economy. What's your view on that?
Right. No, I don't have the exact statistics in my head, but the size of taxes that would need, the size of tariffs rather, that would need to be imposed to completely replace taxes would be on the order of hundreds of percent. It's a pipe dream. It would never happen. And also, what would happen if we engaged in a tariff war on that basis? We would have taxes disappearing, but prices going up. I mean, to a huge extent. So it's not a realistic view. It's better for us to approach trade rather from a free market perspective, and deal with other countries tariffing us as it comes, which is going to be the case in some places. But they are the worse off for tariffs, not us.
And Vance, as we finish up, can lower taxes, as we were just discussing with Peter, or potentially the inflows of capital that Trump is gaining from like LG and even Apple to produce in America, can that offset some of the loss from potential tariff loss revenue?
Well, one thing that I would think about is instead of looking at a lost revenue, think about the gains that we're getting. We're getting the gains already from Apple and other companies that are, we have Stargate, $500 billion in AI and innovation and technology, and part of that coming to Texas where I live. I think we should be focusing more on those types of things versus raising taxes on Americans, which is what tariffs are. And if you do that, you will create more opportunity for people to have jobs and income and higher wages. I mean, real wages and inflation-adjusted average hourly earnings, or weekly earnings, I should say, are still down about 2% since Biden took office in January 2021. This is why so many people felt this angst going into the November election. They voted for a different direction. And unfortunately, we're getting uncertainty and higher taxes, which is what we would consider from more of the Democrat sort of side from the Republicans. And instead, I think they need to focus on making the Tax Acts and Jobs Cut permanent, if I can get that in there, and also deregulation. If we do those sort of things, we'll be in a much better situation for the future than raising taxes through tariffs.
Well, a lot to look out for. Peter, Earle, Vance, Ginn, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.